So we're going to do a share screen here. We're just going to start to deal with the folks who were here, our panel. So we'll start. Dr. Claire Cohen is an African-American child and adolescent psychiatrist who has been practicing in the Pittsburgh area since 1984. She grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and attended Hahnemann Medical College, now Drexel University Medical School there, and did her general psychiatry residency at the University of Chicago. She then moved to Pittsburgh to do her child and adolescent fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh's Western Psychiatric Institute. I just got a message, unable to live stream, so we have to move on. She fell in love with Western Pennsylvania and has practiced here ever since. She has worked in a variety of settings, including community mental health clinics, partial hospitals, school-based settings, and currently an inpatient hospital setting. In addition to her career, Dr. Cohen has always been very active in her community. In the late 1980s, she was involved in supporting the strike of the Pittston coal miners. In the 1990s, she was a member of the group that fought to get a civilian police review board in Pittsburgh. More recently, she has been involved in efforts to stop the school to prison pipeline on the Pittsburgh Public Schools and in fighting for Medicare for All as a member of Physicians for a National Health Program and the Western Pennsylvania Coalition for Single Payer Healthcare. Brother Nnamdi Lumumba is a statewide organizer of Ujima People's Progress Party based in Baltimore, Maryland. Brother Nnamdi is a very humble brother. He keeps it real succinct and short, but he has a long and deep history as far as being a revolutionary and being a community organizer and activist and providing some very principled leadership for many of us today. Ashaki Benta is a veteran organizer and freedom fighter in the Black Freedom Movement. She is a member of the Black Workers for Justice, having served in various areas of responsibility over the years, including editor of Justice Speaks, founding organizer of the Black Workers for Justice Women's Commission, and director of organization and international director. She currently serves as the chair of the Black Workers for Justice's Black Liberation Working Group, and she's also national organizer of the National Black Liberation Movement Unity Initiative. Erica Keynes is a coordinating committee and outreach team member of the Black Alliance for Peace, as well as an outreach member of the Black Working Class Centered Ujima People's Progress Party in Maryland. Keynes is the founder of Liberation Through Reading. She is also co-editor of the African revolutionary blog, Hood Communist. And last but not least, myself is Khalid Rahim. I'm a community activist and organizer living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm the founder and chairperson of the New African Independence Party, and I'm a former member of the Black Panther Party. So that being said, let us now begin and kind of go back to the outline. We're going to stop the screen share. We're going to go back to just the regular outline, just to give folks a sense, once again, of how things are supposed to flow. I think, Brother Nnamdi, were you scheduled to be first on this?
If I am, I'm ready to go.
You ready to go? Okay. All right. Okay, Brother Nnamdi, go ahead.
Yeah, so part of this discussion that I will be talking about is the question of voter suppression. And I think obviously this is something important that Black working class parties, Black independent parties should be talking about, because it directly relates to how we manifest our political power, whether that's in the electoral arena or if it's in the day-to-day struggles that we use to push policy. I want to put out a couple of important dates, and I think it's important for us to kind of just historically contextualize the question of voter suppression.
Well, Brother Namdi, could I just pause for 1 second?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that we wanted people to do, especially you, for example, because you didn't really offer a whole lot. We wanted people to, first of all, devote some minutes to talk about your history, your
I got you.
past, and your background.
Yep. Sorry for going into that discussion. So yeah, I'll just add some more. Sorry about that. So I've been an organizer in the Mid-Atlantic region since the early 90s. I've been a part of, initially a part of the Uhuru movement as a cadre and as a mass organizer. That gave me opportunity to have work in police brutality, economic development, being able to develop shoelays as well. The work to build a Pan-African international struggle of African workers in the struggle for the national unity of Africa under the leadership of Black working class people. I've also, over the last decade, been, as you said before, the state organizer for the Ujima People's Progress Party. It is an attempt to create Maryland's first Black workers-led electoral party for social and economic justice. Again, centered in the values of anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, anti-sexism, and anti-racism, being able to uphold the unification of African liberation in the context of the electoral arena. We understand that politics is more than the elections. It is about our organization around issues that affect us as Black workers, as it affects other working class people and colonized people throughout the world. We have had the opportunity to run me as a candidate for the party to explore what this looks like in motion. We have in that time as well started initiatives around food sovereignty work, around providing food, especially during the COVID crisis. And we were able to help provide food for communities, especially for public housing communities, being able to start our own collective gardening program so that we can start understanding what it looks like to be independent of the capitalist food distribution market. We've also had work continuously around fighting back police brutality in the state of Maryland. We are fighting the laws that is called the Leo Bill, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which gives them legal rights above and beyond those of everyday citizens. It allows police officers to commit heinous crimes without any discipline, even internally from the police department. And it makes it even harder for the community itself to get justice. We are supportive of the process of community control of police, which would include defunding and reallocating resources, but also includes giving power to Black communities to be able to set policies, hire and fire as well. And so we are also members of the Black Alliance for Peace. It is a great complement to our local work. As members of the Black Alliance for Peace, we are tied into the international work that is going on. And we represent the Baltimore front, right? The Maryland front of what needs to happen in resistance to aggressions on our mother continent, Africa, but also throughout the diaspora where African people are struggling, whether that be in Cuba, be in Haiti, all over the United States, wherever African people are being oppressed and exploited. Our relationship to the Black Alliance for Peace allows us to be engaged, to be able to educate. And lastly, just on that question of education, one of the big parts of what we do today is political education. The process that the electoral politics does is undermine people's understanding of the real world. And people are often asked to make choices about leaders and policies that they have no idea about. And so political education is a deep, important step that our movement needs to be a part of. We do that on a regular basis. Again, our relationship to the Black Alliance for Peace allows us to have access to research and to practical solutions around how we get out of our economic and political problems. And I encourage you, if you are a part of an organization that does not do political education, to take that banner up. It will fuel all of the work that you do. It will fuel all the relationships that you build. And it's a very important part of African people being liberated and self-determined in our own image. Thank you.
Great, great. So now, could you, are you going to speak a little bit more about the voter suppression and the fight back against that, Brother Nabu?
If you want me to, you tell me how to run my mouth. So,
no, brother, you know I ain't going to do that. Hey, brother. But go
certainly.
ahead. Yeah,
So,
yes.
yeah,
yes,
I'm going
absolutely.
to certainly. So yeah, so we're going to talk about voter suppression. And again, with us building a Black Independent Party, I think it's important that this is part of the contribution, because we have to raise the political education of our whole community, not just people in our organization, right? So people even have to understand civics in a way which challenges the ruling class's assumption about what civics is. So again, I'll throw out some numbers. 1869, the first Civil Rights Act is put in place. This act supposedly gives African men the right to vote, right? And of course we know that indeed was a contradiction because it was uneven throughout the country. 1920, women's suffrage happens in the United States. So again, while we talk about democracy in America, and democracy, America being the highest example of democracy, even white women in this country did not have the right to vote. Just a little more than 100 years ago, it took them that long. And of course, 1965, the Voters' Right Act was implemented. For many of us, some of us in our lifetime, right, were around before that was implemented. And this was to make illegal discrimination against voting, making it impossible, making it hard for people to vote. So we're talking about democracy in the real world, right? Most Western democracies like to point to something like Greece as the example, the birthplace of democracy. And of course, what we know is when you dig into that, probably less than 10% of the Greek population actually had the right to vote because almost everyone else was held in slavery. So what we know in the real world is democracy has a class character. Not everyone has access to quote unquote democracy. And voting is not necessarily an act of democracy, but it is definitely a part of what makes up democracy, right? And part of what they would even use is if elections aren't used, sometimes they use that as some kind of marker whether or not societies are advanced or not, but they're all different forms of democracy that can be, participated in to make decisions and to govern your society. But I think it's important that we demythicize the concept of voting in elections, right? Because in America, you get these things, rock the vote, and you make the choice, and every election is the most important election, right? Every election is the most important election of our life, as if you forgot 2 or 4 years ago, that was the most important election. But we asked the question, what is an election? Right? Now, of course, it's a formal process that we recognize, right? And it's organized so you can choose a person to sit in office, or you might even vote on a ballot initiative, some kind of policy, right? But elections' purpose is to maintain an orderly transfer of power, parts of the ruling class. Because in capitalism, we have to understand, capitalism ain't really about the majority of what people need or decide, right? If capitalism was based upon the majority of people making decisions in their interest, the vast majority of people are working class and poor people, right? And they would vote, they would make a decision to distribute the wealth and resources of society fairly and equally amongst all those who don't have it. But democracy under capitalism is about the ruling class, which is the capitalist class, being able to maintain power and be able to orderly transfer who runs the government, the instruments of government, right? So they can implement policy. And in America, what we have is what they call the two-party system, which is really one political party that has two sides of its dichotomy, right? One is a reactionary, conservative capitalist party, and the other is a reactionary liberal capitalist party, right? And the only thing they disagree in is fractions of how capitalism, white supremacy, and domination through imperialism and colonialism should be implemented. Not that those things should go away. right? And
Right.
we have to be clear that that does not represent democracy for us as colonized people, and it does not represent democracy for working class people in general, right? So we got to talk about what that is. The concept of voter suppression is not new. It may be something that we hear a lot of, but it's not new. When I started this, I gave you a couple of dates. And the important thing about those dates is until those laws went into effect, voter suppression was normalized, right? Before 1869, no one assumed that African people held in chattel slavery had any right to vote. It was just off the table. So you have the 1869, and in theory, now some voter suppression was no longer acceptable, right? And some of it was. Same thing with 1920. So voter suppression of women was acceptable legally until 1920, right? And so we keep understanding that what is voter suppression? Voter suppression is any tactics, any policy put into place, right, whose purpose is to influence the outcome of an election. And usually that means keeping certain segments of the population outside of that electoral process, right? And again, I want to make sure we are always clear. Election and democracy are not the same things, right? Because we can decide right now as a body what we want to do without having a formal election. We could have whole discussions about what that looks like. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's long, but democracy is the ability of people to make decisions, right? Even in America, it's not even a direct democracy, it's a republic. People vote in representatives, in theory, they vote in representatives that are supposed to fight for your interests. The truth is, again, we understand that capital is what really makes the decision, right? Anybody who runs for any high office and they're getting all these donations, they're getting all these endorsements. These are things that come from the ruling class and their decision about who is going to divide up the leadership, right, for their class, right? I think it's really important. Now, one thing in more recent times, and this is just in the last several months, there are almost 400 anti-voter bills that have been introduced in 48 states in the United States, right? Mm-hmm. Now, we would say, well, primarily that's the Republicans doing that. And in this case, it's true. But we have to always remember that these things don't always stay stagnant. There was a time, right, when African people came out of slavery, the Republican Party was the party, right, that African people helped build. It was the party of the anti-slave position, right? Whereas the Democratic Party was the party of the slave owner, of slavery, right? And over time, those positions have gone back and forth. And also, even in each state, depending upon which party is in power, there are always attempts at minor, subtle voter registration laws that are put in place so that that ruling party can make it easier for itself to hold on to power, right? And I'll give you some examples, just for instance, really quickly. Across the country, 1 in 16 Africans right now cannot vote due to some form of disenfranchisement law right now. Counties with large minority populations have fewer polling sites and poll workers on average throughout the whole country, right? As late as 2018, Latino and Black people weren't able to get off of work to go to the polls, right? So you even had to make a choice between feeding your family, right, or going to vote for somebody who probably has no agenda for you anyway. Right? 25% of voting age African people do not have a government issued ID, right? So when you put laws in place that require photo ID, you've almost made it possible to eliminate 1/4 of the voting potential of any community, right? And then I also want to point out that for Native Americans, a major barrier for them is geographic. They put voting booths in locations in places which make it almost impossible for them to get to, right? 32% of Native Americans in South Dakota cannot get to the polling locations, and they decide not to go. In their own land, they can't even participate in the sham of democracy called elections, right? And so we want to just quickly point out the tools of voter suppression, voter restriction laws, criminalization of the ballot box, things like waiting in line have you, who can be there, who can talk to you, right? Where, how far? They can literally criminalize that activity, and they continue to do. Felony disenfranchisement, which is a long-standing tactic. Even when they were able to create pig laws and things like that, that would make it more likely for African men and women to get felonies. When you came out, they made sure you were completely disenfranchised, right? No longer to be able to vote. Voter purging is a huge tactic as well, where you can literally remove people off the voter rolls without them even knowing. Sometimes you don't even know until you show up at the polls that you've been removed, right? And of course, something, again, very old, gerrymandering and redistricting, where in some places, the truth is, it's typical. Every 10 years after you do a census, they're able to say, well, this is what the populations look like. Therefore, we're going to use that data to make decisions, right, to represent so that people have better representation. And in some cases, they create whole areas that don't make sense, right? You put people together and say, you carve out, so you ensure that maybe in this district, a Republican can win because you've made sure that you've carved out the right number, or you make sure a Black person can be elected. These are all kind of games that they play, right? But have nothing to do with the real representation issues of the mass of people in those areas. It's all about control. And I think that's the one thing that we have to be very clear about, that in this era, we cannot be confused about whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party making these decisions. All of it is in the interest of maintaining power, the electoral power of the capitalist ruling class, right? And that we have no vested interest in supporting one side, the Democrats or the Republicans, but being very clear about what our economic interests are, what our political interests are, right? The fight against voter suppression is real and it's local. So all of us should be aware of what is happening. At the very least, we should understand the disenfranchisement laws in our state. We should understand what's going to be happening with the rezoning. I mean, the redistricting and the gerrymandering, because here it is, 2021. Now they're using the information from the 2020 census. As a matter of fact, it was pointed out in the Trump administration, they tried to add your national origin, right, as a part of, whether or not you had citizenship, they try to add whether you had citizenship in the census. The purpose of the census is not to know how many citizens live in an area. It's how many people live in the area, because that then tells, in some logical sense, it's supposed to tell them how to reevaluate resources that are needed in each area. Well, if you can take people who are not considered US citizens out of the discussion, then you can also change the whole number about representation. You can change the money, the scenario about how much resources there, schools should be open, all those, healthcare, you can change all of that and act as if those people don't exist, right?
Brother,
I think it's important because
if I could just make a point.
No.
I mean, brother, you on a great roll. I just want to make a point real quick though. The things that you just pointed out, representation, economic power, right? Control over funding and resources. Those are three very important points to push back against the brothers and sisters, especially from within our communities, who don't think voting is important, right? Like we always try to emphasize, voting is very important. If you think that voting is not important, why do you think there's so much hostility and pushback coming from the right forces? Why do you think there's so much intrigue, right, and flim-flam coming from the so-called progressive forces to encourage Black people to register to vote so they can control the Black vote to push whatever agendas they think are needed? Also, the interaction or the intersection between prison gerrymandering, regular gerrymandering, and voter disenfranchisement. On one hand, Black folks who have criminal records and backgrounds, formerly incarcerated and convicted people, get slammed when they come home as far as being able to vote. But during the course of the incarcerations, public officials and politicians on all sides use their numbers, in particular state and federal and county jails, to boost their congressional district numbers in order to apply for more funding or additional funding. So it's kind of, it's such a hypocritical position that they take.
And to that point, a city like Baltimore, which is a majority African city, when you take a lot of African women and men and dispersed them throughout the state into some other areas that tend to be more conservative and more white, their bodies are counted as a part of those local districts. So you now not only physically taking our numbers from us, but now you're also taking the resources that should have been associated with where they live, right? And disproportionately, put it in another location. So the struggle, I think, is important. Black revolutionaries, African revolutionaries need to understand electoral struggle as a part of the overall struggle, right? It is not the only part of the struggle that needs to be implemented, because we have to understand there are multiple fronts. And we must have engagement around this. We must have our agendas, our platforms that transition. We shouldn't have an electoral agenda that's separate from our liberation agenda, right? You shouldn't have a platform that speaks to your national liberation, but that platform doesn't show up in your electoral work, right? Mm-hmm. We have to be very consistent, because we are building a movement and we're fighting for our interests. We're fighting for our national self-determination. The process of engaging in electoral struggle is again a strategy that we have to understand, and we have to be much better at communicating our ideas, so that not only can we win in electoral struggles, whether it be for a policy or a person, but also to be able to organize people off of the work that we're doing, so that we build real political power. Again, elections are not the only form of democratic struggle, and we have to be really clear that elections are a tool that we should be using in the accumulation of our economic, political, and social power for national liberation. So I want to add that to the discussion, and hopefully we can talk about this a little bit more.
Great. Great. Uhuru. Uhuru. So next up, we want to welcome Sister Ashaki Benta. I think she joined us in the last couple of minutes or so. We want to say welcome, Sister Ashaki. I'm glad that you can make it here this afternoon.
I've actually been on the whole time. I just hadn't joined.
Oh, okay. Well,
thank you. The right way.
Thank you. I'm glad. I'm glad you were able to hook up.
Yeah.
And I really apologize again for some of the technical difficulties that we've been experiencing.
No problem. We all have them with this process.
So listen, if you could talk about your history and the things that you've been doing, and some of the things you're doing now, and then from there you can break off and talk about the issues and struggles of building national unity, principled unity, and so forth and so on.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank the New African Independence Party for inviting me to participate. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm really pleased to be on with Brother Nnamdi and Sister Erica, and everybody who's participating in this discussion today. So thank you very much for having me. I guess in terms of my background, I was born in Gary, Indiana, and I started my activism at a very early age. I can remember making a first commitment to the struggle of Black people at the age of 14 or 15, 1968, when Dr. King was assassinated. Kind of started my conscious participation in efforts around the liberation of Black people, and I became an activist in the years from there. I was kind of born a nationalist in a sense, because I grew up in a church that they called a holiness religion back in those days, Pentecostal, and that church had a philosophy that, quote unquote, the Black man was ordained by God to have a kingdom here on earth, not just in heaven. So that was our orientation, and I learned some of the history of our church, and apparently that Marcus Garvey was at the founding meeting of our church, and we had a founder who E.D. Smith, who then, after founding our church in his later years, returned to Africa. We were told growing up, and went to Ethiopia and died there. But that's the kind of atmosphere I was raised in. So I was kind of a nationalist growing up through my grandmother's participation in that church. We weren't a political family or anything like that. But that's kind of how I got my start. So I had a kind of nationalist leaning uh, growing up, and then with the assassination of Dr. King, I started becoming more conscious. And as a teenager, one of the first black books I ever read or knew it was written by a black person was Autobiography of Malcolm X. So that kind of informed my youth and also furthered my commitment. And so I just became an organizer from there. My first organization was Congress of African People. The National Black Political Assembly had come to Gary, convened in Gary in 1972. I was a teenager then and very aware that that was happening, and started organizing with the Congress. And at that time, it was moving away from cultural nationalism to Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought. So I participated in the study groups involved with that, and that kind of began my process. Went to school in Indiana as well. Graduated from Valparaiso University, and was a political activist, black activist on campus there. And when my last year of college, I went to Europe and lived for about 6 months, and I went from there to uh, Chicago to live, preparing to become a journalist. But as
Mhm.
I, spent those last months in Chicago, there came to be the opportunity to make a choice between having a career in journalism or becoming a member of the Black Liberation Movement somehow. And I just made the decision at that time that I wanted to work for Black liberation, and that's the way I kind of began organizing. And I went from there to be an activist in Chicago during those years. And my first job was as a union organizer, and I began from there. So over the years, I've done a tremendous amount of different kinds of organizing, including organizing trade unions, and I work with SEIU in Chicago, and I was on the Southern Regional staff of SEIU in Atlanta for a number of years, and had joined in those early Chicago years. Uh, I was some of my mentors were, uh, from the civil rights movement and the white left movement. Some of those activists kind of introduced me to, uh, as I said, I wanted to work in the black community and not just in a multi-racial organization. So they gave me a copy of a newspaper called Jihad News, and that seemed to just really capture my heart at that time. That was the newspaper of the African People's Party. And at that time, I joined the African People's Party. And those months after I learned of that, I went to Chicago. The first person I met was Muntu Matsumaila. He passed on
Mm.
now. And through him, I was introduced to Saladin Muhammad and his wife, Naima. And I attended my first National Party Congress, which was the third party Congress of the African People's Party in Philly. And there I met, Chokwe Lumumba and Mutulu Shakur and, just a host of people. Akbar Muhammad Ahmad, who was the chairman of the party, became one of my mentors then. And, and I just, grew from there over the years. And one of the significant things about the Third Party Congress of the African People's Party was the discussion that was going on at the time as to how to move forward as a revolutionary nationalist. And so there was kind of a little bit of a split where the there was a sense that as revolution, all of us would move south and began to organize, seeing the southern states as the so-called national territory of black people, and and we went from uh, a discussion of how to proceed. And at that time, I came in with the question of organizing workers and the question of women's rights, and I joined the party with those two questions, as political necessities that had to be addressed by any Black liberation movement, and those were my concentrated focuses. And so we went from there in the question of uh, organizing workers at in their workplaces, and organizing women to fight against sexism and these kind of things. Those were questions that came out in the third party Congress, and so some of us went on from there and founded the Black Workers for Justice coming south. Saladin and his wife Naima moving back to their southern roots in North Carolina. I was still in Chicago, but I started coming down during that period to North Carolina as Black Workers for Justice was being developed and built. And we fused the question of women's rights into the question of the black organizing the black working class. And others went on to other versions. The Republic of New Africa, had its own view of, how to organize in the South. But many of the comrades from there moved south during that period, as everybody knows. So that's basically, been my background. I've been an organizer in the electoral arena, in the community arena, organizing black workers. We came south because the question of organizing black workers in the South was completely open compared to the way trade unions were formed in the North. So we paid careful attention to that and wanted to organize a different kind of unionism, and we needed an organization to uh, you know to address the question of organizing black workers and introducing the black working class to the issue of raising its level of organization and consciousness. And so we worked to do that over the years. So I've been involved in a number of campaigns and efforts. The struggle for black political power in Keysville, Georgia, was one area that I worked in. We were victorious in that little struggle some years back. Harold Washington's campaign in Chicago, we formed an independent movement around his campaign, and led by the nationalist community, and then organizing workers in both in trade unions and in black workers organizations in terms of Black Workers for Justice. So we had the Hamlet fire where 25 workers were killed. We organized around that. We built really sectors of BWFJ all over the South. Later, I moved to Atlanta. I worked in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi. Came back to North Carolina again, and so that's been a lifetime of work. Still a member of BWFJ, and right now we're fusing the question of the black working class, as we've always done, with the question of black liberation. And so that's kind of been, the the background and the participation I've had in the struggle. So, do you want me to go on from here to talk specifically about the work that I'm doing
Yes,
now?
absolutely. I think what you just shared with us in terms of your background is a direct line to the work that you're currently involved with. And I think your history is very fascinating. Your history is like a Black liberation history book. It's like if we wanted a textbook of how certain things develop, we just need to listen to you and listen to your personal story and your personal narrative. And I think it would be very helpful and inspirational and motivational, especially for a lot of the younger activists and organizers and radicals and revolutionaries. So, to help folks to connect the dots. Oftentimes, and I'm sure it was the same thing for our generation, because I'm from your generation as well. Oftentimes, we think that when we finally get it, that nobody before us had ever gotten it, right? So we have a tendency to think that everything is brand new for the first time. We think that our group, our generation, is the first group of generation to come out and point a finger and condemn capitalism or imperialism or white supremacy, or we're the first generation to recognize the racism within the school system or the racism within the criminal justice system. And so, we bump our heads a lot, But then at some point, we start to understand that the things that we're saying today were said yesterday. And that now it's upon our shoulders to continue
Mm-hmm.
to strengthen that narrative and to push for the type of systemic and institutional changes that are needed. So I think just listening to your narrative is really, it's like a period in our people's struggle where we can visualize through your story how our political consciousness developed and grew over the last several decades. So I want to thank you for that. So now if you could lead us into the current work that you're doing and how important that is for us today.
You know, I prepared a few slides just briefly. I'm going to try to see if I can share screen. I should be able to do that, right? I think so. Uh,
Hopefully everyone can see your share screen. I know I can at this point. There it is. Hopefully everyone else can see it. Can everyone see her screen?
uh,
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Yes, we can.
Great.
uh,
Brother Namdi, that yes we can. I'll be careful with that. Almost had a headache, a real flash headache when you said that. You know, you got that powerful voice. It was like, oh no, don't tell me you're gonna infiltrate our thing too. You're gonna lead us off into something else. All right.
all right, guys. This is not intended to be long or anything, or don't want to bore everybody, but just looking at some objective facts in regard to where we are as Black people now, and this is just showing the the Pew estimate of the population of the African American people. I talked from this slide a couple of weeks ago, but this I'm showing this because it ought to kind of inform our strategy when we think of the question of Black liberation and the distribution of where we are. So according to this Pew research, 56% of us are still in the South, and then the other distribution is 10% in the West and 17% in the Northeast and the Midwest. So it's interesting, but we're everywhere. Let's see if I can go to the next slide. I also used this one a couple of weeks ago as well, where it's showing the Black majority counties, as of 2018, that they've increased really 72 counties, but they're primarily in the South as well. Doesn't mean that we don't organize everywhere we are, but this is just a distribution, and this is something else that should inform our strategy. So I wanted to raise the question of the what we're trying to do with the National Black Liberation Movement National Unity Initiative, and what kind of objectives we have, and the process that we're attempting to implement, and that is in terms of our objectives, that we're trying to develop a program and basis of national unity within the Black Liberation Movement that is anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and anti-patriarchal, at least as a fundamental basis for all of our unity of the whole Black Liberation Movement. We're hoping that this process will contribute to the reemergence of the National Black Liberation Movement based on the national unity of all political historic tendencies that we've had, and that working with organizations that have a revolutionary vision for the transformation and self-determination of the African American people. So we feel all tendencies should unite at the national level. We hope to contribute to the deepening, expanding, and building of national social movements based in the Black working class as the primary social force capable of challenging capital and transforming the states. And then the question of building close ties to the masses, as a Black liberation movement. This is vital, that we have to be engaged in struggle with the masses. We're basing our outlook and work on the question of the centrality of the Black working class, and so we're approaching that work right now. Again, it's kind of a new formation, within the last year and a half or so that we've begun this process, as many of the participants here know. But we're focusing on trying to anchor the work of this initiative within the Black working class uh, as the central political force. And our approach is to help support and to help build the social movements of the class, strengthen those, bring them, hopefully to a national level. Not that we would do this by ourselves, but this is the effort or the concentration that we would make. So, black workers at the point of production and service still needs to be a
Mhm.
concentration area. Community fight back, building in the community around perhaps the police brutality questions that, like Namdi mentioned earlier, housing and rent, evictions, cooperative economic justice, but just galvanizing these movements together at across the country, where right now we still have small, we have a lot of active groups, thousands, hundreds, but uniting them together so that there's a social force created is important. Then the question of environmental justice and climate change is an important area that's impacting our community. The question of political prisoners and prisoners of war. And hopefully we've also always had the vision of, organizing around black political power and, how to approach that. So just a couple more slides. Um, just talking about black workers themselves on the front lines, where we're located in terms of of these industries in the country. We're the frontline workers, and it's really revealed itself or exposed itself during the pandemic. And so, COVID has affected our community at a disproportionate level, given that we're the people who are doing the work on the front lines that are most exposed, to the public. So it's important to organize there in that respect. Again, the community fight back issues, uniting the community that, has already shown itself around a number of questions. But how do we build these movements, around housing and evictions or the police brutality or economic justice? How do we build these into, powerful social movements, as we've seen in the last few years around, Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and all the rest, Sandra Bland, etc. How do we build these in a national social force that is connected to, or the Black Liberation Movement is tied and recognized and correct and connected to these social movements, not just the Democratic Party. We want
Mhm.
independence from Democratic, Republican, capitalist parties to organize on their own. The question of climate, environmental justice, climate change justice, and racism. Our communities are the most impacted around the country. Everywhere we live, the black community is disproportionately impacted. Uh, you know, uh, 57% of people of color, particularly African Americans, but live in these counties that are are dumping grounds for environmental causes and problems. So we have high levels of asthma and things like this. So building movements around these kind of things is where we want to fight. Uh, just want to have been doing these past few years, which is very, very positive, very good. But looking at the questions of the political prisoners that our movement has produced, and beginning to educate and organize the masses, go deeper and deeper into the masses of our people with recognition of the sacrifices that have been made. And many of these brothers and sisters, Assad is still in exile. Brother Matulu Shakur is still in prison. Sundiata, they're older, sick comrades. They should have been released by now. Brother Muntakim has been out as a part of the important work being done around the question of the tribunal. So all of these, these are important forces and figures in the history of the Black Liberation Movement that needs to be honored and educated and built among the masses. And the last one, the question of black political power. I know it's hard to see this image to the right. It's a little bit blurry, unfortunately. But I did want to emphasize that when we're talking we have a lot of uneducated communities around this country, but and it continues to this day with the gerrymandering and the the way that the political uh, you know uh, districts and things are being drawn, it has a tremendous impact. So there's 1,209 communities, 91 counties from 26 states with African American majority populations over 50%. So where are we concentrating our work and building around the question of power and change in capital? We have to link ourselves into these concrete areas in our thinking. So that's basically. I'll stop there in terms of the work that we're attempting to do and want to do with the other comrades, leaders, brothers, sisters, and organizations throughout the country. In unity with rebuilding and reemerging in the 21st century, taking our liberation movement to a higher level and hopefully on to victory. So I'll end there. Thank you. I hope I didn't go over my time, but
No, it was great. It was great. I actually lost a connection for about 30 seconds, so I had to see what was going on real quick.
okay.
You know
All
how
right.
it
Well,
is.
I hope people. I hope people were able to hear the presentation. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you so
it
much.
was very well presented. Thank you. It's very informative as well. We greatly appreciate it. I think what you said as far as political power and political representation is so important. I know we have several questions, and we have some very good, deep questions about electoral politics, political power. What does it really mean? Does it reinforce the system? Does it reinforce self-determination? What are some of the contradictions? And so I would encourage people to hang around as long as you possibly can, so we could get to some of these questions and we can open up some discussion about these conflicts, contradictions, and which way we should go. Next, I'd like to have Sister Erica Kane, if she could do her presentation. She's been very patient. She's been on time. She was here, before we even went on officially, and she's been very patient. And I really would love to hear from you. And so if you could go next, we'd like to hear something about your personal background and how you came involved into the struggle and the work that you've done in the past and the work that you currently do.
Okay. Well, first, I would like to thank you, Brother Khalid, for inviting me to this space to have this conversation, and my comrades as well that are on this panel. And then also, you might hear my son in the
Okay.
background. But yeah, so I want to start with how why I do what I do rather than the long history of, because my history is not that long in comparison. I concretely got involved in organizing in 2018 through prison abolition struggle. I was supporting the national prison strike at the time. But a lot of what drove me to do what I do and why I'm involved in organizing work. The other day I was asked a question about, well, people have a lot of ideas, but like, how do you know exactly what to do? And I responded by, well, what's important to you? And what has always been important to me, coming from an education background, has been just that. I've taught early childhood education for approximately 10 years. So I understand pretty much base level educating. And I know there was a lot of conversations because I come from, I guess, an era of where organizing is predominantly handled online and social media and such like that. And a lot of the conversations had on social media was about critical thinking, but there was no conversations about political education. And as I started to read more and more from a lot of the people that Ashaki just named, that she has actually worked with, reading their scholarship and their books, there was such an emphasis on political education. So like I said, in 2018, in 2017, I started Liberation Through Reading, which is my book club. And the emphasis on that was just a sort of urgent community need. They were doing a back to school program, like giveaway, and I offered to participate in some way. And the only way I could think of, because I was not organizing at the time, was children's books, because I had a son at the time, and it was an emphasis for me to have representation in children's books and literature. And that is where Liberation Through Reading has started. And since I have gifted over 2,000 books in several communities on the East Coast, in several cities in the East Coast, to Black children, Black books by Black authors. And then following that, in 2018, I started my book club because, like I said, I was involved in the prison strike, but I was not really aware too much about abolition. And again, the long going political prisoner struggle. So I wanted to read Our Prisoners Obsolete by Angela Davis, and I invited people to read with me. And that is how the book club emerged, because there's a lot of emphasis on reading as a child, and somewhere along the line, we break from that. And there's no communal engagement or no group reading happening, because people are reading a lot of books by themselves, but they're not really taking away what they probably should be taking away, or engaging the book in a way that maybe someone else could, and bouncing ideas off of that. So that is how I became involved in that same year. Because I was working alongside the Keith Davis Jr. case here in Baltimore. I was introduced to the Black Alliance for Peace because Ajama Baraka was speaking at this event where Kelly Davis was speaking. And I immediately signed up to be a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, because so much of what they were working with or working towards, I could relate just based on the work that I was already doing, and then tapping more into political prisoners in their work around the question of internationalism. And I also met Ujima People's Progress Party members at that same conference. And then I became a member of Ujima then as well, understanding that politically, there was no avenue for us at the time, especially coming off of the 2016 election that was chaos and hectic, and sort of, it sort of put people in a space where they had no idea what to do politically. And the idea of building a Black agenda for our community really struck me. But I can really speak now on like what I do and with the current campaigns and things that I'm working on now. As noted, I am a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, and that is an organization centered on recapturing the Black radical traditions of the anti-imperialism and revolutionary internationalism. So BAP's approach is building unity from a bottom up by enhancing the capacities of existing organizations like Ujima, but also providing an organizational home to emerging Black radicals. But I want to discuss the politics of anti-imperialism and internationalism. How do we understand anti-imperialism as a broader material reality faced by Africans in the US, enough to understand its relationship to the overall liberation of African and colonized people in the world? And that is through the socialization of wars and militarization of our communities. So the dire conditions that exist in African poor and working class communities here in the US are the result of intentional systematic neglect under a white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist system. And that leaves poor African and other colonized people without the ability to live our full lives. We are systematically dehumanized. Global and domestic imperialism are counterparts. So the work that BAP does is to incorporate just that and help the masses grow to understand that. Because while it may be true that historically African people were the least favorable to wars, the last 8 years of Obama's presidency set the stage for a bold backing of US imperialism by way of patriotism from Black America and an agreement to continuous wars waged on Africans here and abroad. And yesterday marked the 13 years since the establishment of the US African Command, also known as Afrikan. It was established in the months before Obama assumed office as the first Black president. Afrikan went on to expand under his presidency with the support of the Congressional Black Caucus, resulting in 46 various forms of US bases, as well as military-to-military relations between 53 out of 54 African countries and the United States. And this has been achieved through the US's the US's claims that Afrikan is fighting terrorism on the continent. So that fighting terrorism, I should hope that sounds familiar, because they're always fighting the war on drugs and they're fighting, they're fighting crime, but they're fighting terrorism on the continent. So here is where we see that Afrikan is the flip side of the domestic war that's waged on us here by the same repressive state structure against us here. So imperialism and settler colonialism, which is a project intended to completely replace indigenous populations with a settler one by any means necessary, so as to legitimize and continue to perpetuate the theft and land of resources. It should not only be understood as global matters manifested through US military occupation and our tax dollars. The US recently passed the National Defense Authorization Act, and that included billions for Afrikan and the continuation of the Department of Defense 1033 program that transfers millions of dollars worth of military equipment to police forces in our communities. So this is just one example of how imperialism is a domestic issue. It is manifested through the occupation of our communities by militarized police forces. The remnants of settler colonialism are made prevalent each and every day. The relationship is the mirror image of an imperial relationship between the US and the continent. These similarities are most evident when we examine the use of the 1033 program, which is a Department of Defense budget military equipment, which is a budget where military equipment gets transferred to civilian law enforcement agencies, and the US military programs like Afrikan, all seemingly used in so-called wars against terrorism and drugs. But when we examine the purpose and the use of these programs, like the Deadly Exchange, which is the partnership between the IDF, which is the Israeli Defense Forces, and the local police forces, it solidifies a partnership between the US and Israeli government to exchange methods of state surveillance, state violence, and control over civilians. So again, that includes mass surveillance, racial profiling, suppression of protest and dissent. Currently in Baltimore City, there exists the 1033 program. Most recently, the Operation Relentless Pursuit, which is a program that puts more federal officers into these cities, and that Baltimore is one of 7 cities, including Detroit, Albuquerque, Cleveland, Kansas City, Memphis, and Milwaukee. And that all happened under the Trump administration in 2020. And again, it's a surge of federal, state, and local resources. So more police. And also that same Deadly Exchange program that I spoke about with the IDF, that is also in Baltimore City. So when we see countries like Colombia, where Africans are suffering, as the right-wing state that allies with the United States and the same IDF forces training US police to gun down, brutalize, and disappear Afro-Colombians, we need to observe these things as similar, if not the same things happening in our colonial forces here, in our communities here. The national strike that kicked off in April in Colombia, it continues, but the mainstream media coverage has vanished. That's something that we should also notice here. 2020, even though the cameras went away after the summer, people were still in the streets. But the amount of time that mainstream media were able to spend on that was minimal between June and July, even though in DC, people were out in the streets well into election. But the mainstream media coverage vanished after the initial media flurry, and it completely disappeared Colombians from the stories. So this also connects to what is currently happening in Haiti. In July, mainstream media reported on Cuba for days, but these same media spaces highlighted the small Cuban protests over a lack of food and necessities, predominantly attributed to the US-backed blockade against Cuba, ignored 3 years of protests numbering in the tens of thousands against the US-backed neocolonial dictator in Haiti. In fact, it took the assassination of Jovenel Moise for Haiti to get any media coverage at all. And while Biden and his administration expressed support for Black Lives Matter, here in the States, and for democracy during his campaign for president, the true support would have actually meant ending US's meddling in Haiti's affairs. So the assassination relieves the Biden-Harris administration of the embarrassment of having to reconcile that contradiction, but they're also been put back into that place, what's happening currently at the border. So while extending the dictatorship beyond the end of his term, Moise relied on those same, he relied on Haitian police officers who were trained by Colombian police, who are trained by the IDF, who also are training our same police officers here in the States, which is important that we make those connections. The colonial relationship that the US has maintained with Haiti, we can also see the effects of it at the border. So these are just a few examples of the ongoing US aggression against the sovereignty of colonized nations across the world. And why should we expect any less from a settler colonial nation that has divided the world into military commands? The Indo-Pacific Command, Central Command, Afrikan, and Southcom. But again, why should these things matter to us? As explained, foreign policy is domestic. The US military and its over 400 bases worldwide serve as occupiers in the same way the overt police state does in our neighborhoods. What is the difference between Afrikan, which is said to combat the war on terror, and militarized policing units like Operation Relentless Pursuit and Operation Legend, both used in multiple cities across the country to combat crime and domestic terrorism? What is the difference between the murderous Israel occupation of Palestine and the occupation of African neighborhoods in the US using IDF-trained police units? African people in the US have a colonial relationship with the largest society. It is a relationship categorized by institutional racism. This colonial status operates in 3 areas: politically, economically, and socially. We are politically stunted in our political decisions made for us due to a lack of power. We are economically disenfranchised and dependent on the largest society. And this is maintained by a social order that designates police in our communities as occupying forces. Furthermore, settler colonialism criminalizes the very survival of poor Black and brown people. So the money for wars comes directly from money not allotted to the poor. The access military equipment ends up in the local police departments of African communities here in the US. When you hear rhetoric like sanctions are an act of war, we can recognize this act of war here with welfare reforms. In this regard, we can see how domestic and global imperialism become counterparts. Once Africans in the US understand themselves as colonized people on stolen land, there will be more precise analysis of how liberation is sought and gained through tactics that are tied to revolutionary internationalism, like the Black traditions of the past. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that. That was very informative and very nuanced in terms of your analysis and your presentation, and laying out clearly the connection between domestic policy and international policy. And so when we talk about calling out white supremacy, for example, we talk about calling out economic injustice, we got to call it for what it is. White supremacy is not just a local phenomenon, it's not just a national phenomenon, it's an international phenomenon. And the international economic injustice, we call it out as what it is. It's capitalism on steroids, or it's imperialism. is colonialism. So thank you very much for making those connections and bringing all that together. Sister Claire, are you ready? I know you were doing some other work before. I don't want you to get
I'm ready.
overwhelmed. Are you ready?
I'm ready, and
Uh,
if it's not too late, I might be able to share a screen on something too. I learned in my last thing how to do it.
All right. Well, hey, it is your show. And listen, we have people who've posted some comments and some questions in the chat and maybe in the Q&A. So if you could hold that into the next to the last segment of our program, which is devoted to responding to your questions and responding to your chat comments. So if you could just hold it and wait a minute, we would greatly appreciate it. Sister Claire, you are definitely next.
Okay. All right. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody and welcome everybody. And I sent a note to Ashaki because she and I have been involved in things before. So it's good to see you, Ashaki. Always good to see a good sister in the struggle. Yeah. So so I'll take a little bit to tell you my story. It's and then tell you what the main thing I wanted to talk about now. So basically, I grew up in Philadelphia. I was profoundly influenced by the horrific police brutality under Frank Rizzo. All of my brothers and many of my male family members experienced that. And I think that's what first caused me to, that's what set me on the path. Also, what affected me, to be honest, was from the time I was little, I said I wanted to be a doctor. And everybody kept telling me that because I was a Black woman, I could never be a doctor. So that kind of set me for looking for radical Black women. And I would read, my favorite authors were Andre Lord, Bell Hooks, Angela Davis, Barbara Smith, Toni Morrison. So and Alice Walker, I had some problems with Alice Walker, but still. So that set the stage. Then I did go to medical school. I became a doctor. I went to University of Chicago in Chicago, where I had some interesting experiences. That's a long story, which led me to realize this whole system needed to be thrown out. I didn't know the words racial capitalism then, but I understood that something was this system needed to go. The first thing I did was I joined in the Harold Washington campaign because that's the only thing I knew. By the time that finished, I was moving to Pittsburgh to do what was called a child fellowship. I'm a child psychiatrist. So when I moved here, I knew I needed to find some people, and I was so fortunate. I found Sanjula Bear. And I don't know how many of you know Sanjula Bear, but to this day, he's one of the people I really admire the most. I also found Gail Austin, Carl Redwood. He's another person I greatly admire. I'm trying to think of who else I found. And I found Euclid. And so I quickly became involved in a number of things. Most of them having to do with the Black community, but not extensively. I became involved with the South Africa, getting rid of apartheid in South Africa. And I also became involved in some anti-war stuff. At that time, the US was going down into Latin America, and all I could see was that there were people of color. They weren't always Black, although there's a lot of Black people in Central America, Honduras, Nicaragua. I mean, people aren't aware, and there are Black Mexicans too. So I got involved in the anti-war movement. I also did some did some union stuff, support of labor unions. And then I got greatly involved in the effort against police brutality, because as I said, that was something my whole life had taught me about. And did a lot of struggle around police brutality. I was in this group that founded the current Civilian Police Review Board. We had great hopes, but unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, we dropped the ball. And of course, it was made into a paper tiger by the current government. Then I actually dropped out of the movement for a while. I had You know, we as Black people have a lot of family things that go on. I had a sister that died of cancer, left 6 kids, and I took the kids to raise them because I knew that what kids need is raising. They need somebody who's committed to them. And then the youngest is now 21. I can't believe it. I got back into the movement, I guess you could say roughly about 10 years ago as they were becoming teenagers. And now I've been involved mainly in fighting the school to prison pipeline, because as a child psychiatrist, I've seen how it's really screwed kids, predominantly Black kids, but even kids with special needs. It's really, so I've gotten involved in that. I'm on the advisory board for the Pittsburgh Black Workers Center. And I've also gotten involved in some environmental stuff, but my biggest thing I've been involved in is fighting for universal health care. And to that end, I'm in a group called Western Pennsylvania Coalition for Single Payer Health Care. I'm in Physicians for National Health Program, and I'm in this group of radical physicians called National Single Payer, who just started up because recently. And so I don't know if you need to know any more about my history. I could talk all day about my history, but I guess I'll take the lead to go right into my talk about national health care. It's become a big thing for me for many reasons, partly because I'm 65, and I expected to come in and get some national health care to discover that that may not be. So let me talk some about that, because actually not enough Black people, African Americans are involved in this, and this is the community that's being most hurt by what's the attempts now to privatize Medicare and get rid of it. And they're really targeting us. They're targeting us in the same way they targeted us with those subprime loans, and we're going to be royally screwed. So I've been talking with mainly Carl Redwood here about how we can get make the Black community more aware. I know Black Workers for Justice has been pushing for universal single payer health care too. So I'll talk first, and then I'll try to pull up my my screen sharing. So let me go back and talk. Let me see, how do I do this? Okay, there I go. All right. So we know that 70% of Americans, including Black people, well, let me start back before even universal health care. So as you know, back when I was growing up and Khalid were growing up, and I don't know how old everybody listens to, medical care in the United States was very segregated, and Black people were just basically not treated. There are horrific stories about how we suffered and we died, and it was just blatant. You couldn't go to the hospital. Many Black people born before 1950 do not have a birth certificate because their moms couldn't get in the hospital to deliver babies. So they were delivered at home by midwives, and nobody ever sent a certificate up to their state for a birth certificate. And that's why that's the issue with voter ID. And that's why all these fascists, I'm going to just call them what they are intent on the IDs, because with requiring birth certificates, because they know that that'll just knock a whole lot of Black people off the list just like that. My father was affected by this. I was talking to somebody whose mother was. There were a lot of people, Black and brown, who just never had a birth certificate. Black lifespan was horrendous, and we could go on and on. In the 1960s, I think it was around 1965, 64, 60, I don't have the exact year right now, Lyndon Baines Johnson implemented the Medicare Act for senior citizens. It was just for senior citizens, but also through the Medicare Act, it was used to desegregate the medical system in the United States. And so there's a powerful film. I don't have that link in the chat. I need to go research it, but I can get it to people later, called Power to Heal. You can also Google it. if you want to, and I also have a copy if people ever want me to show it, called Power to Heal, that shows how through the implementation of Medicare, the medical system in the United States was finally desegregated so that Black people could get decent health care. Okay, that didn't take care of all the problems, but at least we got rid of these segregated situations where Black people couldn't get care at all. It used to be that Black people's ambulance was the hearse. Okay, that's how bad it was. So, so we had Medicare, but from the get-go, there were forces that didn't like it. It's a public system like public schools, not for profit, that gives people, this is traditional Medicare, gives everybody, regardless of race, over 65 and older, the ability to go anywhere you want, to go to any doctor you want, to get health care. This was the original plan. The original plan was no co-pays, no deductibles. You just went and said, hey, doc, I need some help. I'm sick. And the doctor treated you. And that was the original plan. There was no networks you had to worry about. So you could pick the doctor you wanted. If you wanted to go to Black female doctor or Black male doctor, you could go to who you wanted. You could go to the facilities you wanted. And there was nobody saying you can't get this care because I'm not going to make money from it. But from the get-go, there was a fight against that. Powerful forces, corporate forces, and the medical, I'm going to call the medical slash and insurance slash pharmaceutical industrial complex was against it. So under the cover, people didn't pay attention. They began rolling back Medicare and privatizing it, even back in the 80s. So the first thing that happened was when Medicare was implemented, Johnson agreed that he would not include vision, dental, and hearing services, which are very important for people over 65. So that was a flaw right there. In the 80s, people were clamoring, we need these services in Medicare. So that was during Reagan. So what the Republicans did under Reagan, and I'm just pulling up because I have my timeline here. What the Republicans did under Reagan, the first thing they did was they introduced a bill in 1982 called the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act to authorize Medicare to contract with private healthcare companies. That's all it did. Wasn't implemented. It actually didn't go into effect in 1985. Although that bill was sitting there, nothing really happened until the 1990s, when under Clinton, the Republicans, Newt Gingrich came along, and he said the Republicans, in their contract with America, part of their plans was to see Medicare, quote, wither on the vine, unquote, and be replaced with an alternative healthcare system based on, quote, personal choice. And he came up with this idea called Medicare plus choice. When Clinton in 1997, instead of fighting for keeping traditional Medicare and improving it by adding these services, he passed a bill called Medicare plus Choice Act into law in 1997. And it was later changed, and that started Medicare Part C. Until that time, there was just Medicare B, A, and B. Okay, but that started Medicare Part C, and basically what it was is what came to be called Medicare Advantage. So that when you went to enroll in Medicare, you were presented with, here's an option. It's presented as if it's choice. You can sign up for this thing called Medicare Part C, Medicare Advantage. But what you weren't told is you were being put into private healthcare, where you would have networks where you couldn't see all the doctors you wanted. You couldn't go to the places you wanted. You would have originally you would have bigger copays in Medicare. Now I'll explain later how that's changed. And you could these private parties could deny you care. Okay. So that just was slowly creeping along. They targeted the Black community, and this is where they came to what's going on right now. Because having now looked at some of the industry newsletters and industry publications. They target the Black community because they see us as a very vulnerable community that's disempowered, that they can give us, they can make pretend they're helping us out and we'll buy it. So they target it as, oh, we'll buy you to the silver sneakers. We'll let you have a place to the silver sneakers. Oh, and again, we'll give you dental care, eye care, and vision care real cheap if you come with us. And lately, how they've been targeting is right now, and they've been offering for this year no copay, no deductibles. But I can tell you, they plan to, once they get all these people hooked, to sock them with copays. And so that they've been targeting our community. They have all these ads. You see Danny Glover, you see all the big billboards with Black people on it, Medicare, I want my Medicare Advantage. And you see those, and they're really targeting our community. But what their whole thing is, they want to make a lot of money. And people fall for it because it looks good. The problem is, and the Inspector General's report just came out. The problem is now they've been studying the impact of Medicare Advantage because it's been going on for over 20 years now. The problem is when you get really sick, when you have kidney failure from your hypertension, when you have massive heart attacks, when you have strokes, when you have cancer, Medicare Advantage plans don't want you anymore because now you're too expensive for them to make money. So then they got it's. I'm sure people have had this experience with their kids because I know on the other end of the spectrum, when you have your kids and they get real sick and your private insurance tells you, well, you can go on CHIP or you can go on Medicaid. We're not paying for it. Well, that's what they're doing for seniors. And so but the problem is in all but 4 states to go back on, to try to turn around and go on Medicare when, and this is important for people to understand this, when you're very ill, all but 4 states, it's difficult to do. There's all these barriers. You have to do this medical assessment and now they want to charge you all this money to get back on Medicare. So a lot of people are finding they can't do it. They can't afford to do it. And actually there's some evidence that people are dying behind this. So anyway, just to make things clear, because some people have said to me, what's wrong with privatization of the health pay, the third-party payer system? What's the problem with it? What's the most efficient, cost-efficient third-party payer in the country? Traditional Medicare. Traditional Medicare, 97 cents of every dollar you put into it, 97 cents of every taxpayer dollar you put into it, or whatever you're putting at deductible, not deductible, I mean premium, because now I think they have this low premiums for you. 97 cents of every dollar goes to direct patient care. Medicare Advantage plans, ACA private insurance plans, only 85 cents of every dollar goes to direct patient care. Only 85 cents because they need to make their profit. Okay. Medicare doesn't, traditional Medicare doesn't. Now along comes this horrible thing under the Trump administration. The private insurance industry has been doing so well with pushing Medicare Advantage that now 40% of seniors have signed up for it because they don't really get or understand that it's not really Medicare. So, and they've been making a killing. In fact, they've been depleting, according to the Inspector General, depleting the Medicare Trust Fund. So they developed a plan under the Trump administration called direct contracting entities. And what direct contracting entities are venture capitalists who are now going to manage your medical care. And they don't give a shit. I mean, I don't mean to curse. I'm sorry. I don't know if we can. They're not interested in seeing what your health care is. They want that profit. And they, under the plans developed, they are allowed to take 40 cents. You only get 60 cents of your every dollar you put in that goes to your direct care. They take 40% cut to go for their profit making. Okay. You can see the big difference. You can see where we're going. So under Trump, they started this plan called the GEO plan, which was going to put everybody in 10 major cities, of course, cities that were predominantly Black, One of them was Philadelphia, not Pittsburgh, but Philadelphia. They picked 10 big metropolitan areas that were predominantly Black and brown, and they were going to put everybody, without telling them, without their permission, without giving them a choice to back out, into these DCE plans, where 60 cents of every dollar was going to go for, 40 cents of every dollar was going to go for profit, for these guys to profit. So that was their plan. When Biden came in, he did stop that one, but he didn't stop a second plan, which was not, that first model was called GEO model because it was based on geographic models. He did stop that one, but he did not stop the second plan, which was, it's not geographic, it's all over the United States, where these venture capitalists can come in and they can manage, quote, manage your healthcare to make their profit. And that's what the DCs, that's what we're fighting against right now. There's 53 of these DCAs. 6 of them are private insurance companies, but the rest are basically venture capitalists. They're not only are they only using 60 cents out of every dollar you put in for your healthcare and keeping the other 40%, but they have a whole plan to get doctors to buy in which they get, and this is what already the Medicare Advantage plans are doing, but these DCAs would do it worse. So they do this thing, which you'll have to watch the video, called upcoding, in which when you come into the doctor's office, they code you as much sicker than you are. That doesn't mean they give you more care. And then they bilk Medicare Trust Fund because they're sending these codes that present you as much sicker than you are in to get extra money. So the example you'll see if you watch the webinar that we had a webinar into this, is like someone coming in with asthma. Normally they would be able to get $9,000 for Medicare, but they upcoded with all this stuff saying it's COPD and all this, and they get $32,000 for that. Okay, instead. And there's many other examples of that. So they do all this, and they don't care if they exhaust the Medicare Trust Fund. They don't care if people are left out to dry. They don't really care about how sick you are. And they've targeted the Black community because they think it's an easy community to target. Now, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. We do need universal public health care that is not under private corporations that want to make money. Why? Because the United States has the worst health indices of any of the rich 20 to 30 richest countries in the world. They're called OECD countries, about 25 countries. And we're on the bottom, and we're below the bottom on some indices. And the main reason why we're so low is because our people have such poor healthcare coverage, such poor healthcare. And it's not just coverage, but so for example, I'll just give you 3 indices. So lifespan, we have the lowest lifespan. Okay, when you look at from birth, lowest life expectancy of all the wealthy countries. We're the wealthiest country in the world, but our country has the lowest life expectancy of all the rich countries. The next example to give you is infant mortality. We have the highest infant mortality of all the wealthy countries, but we're the richest in the world. And then this is the worst one. This one is really bad. Maternal mortality. Maternal mortality is the death rate of women due to pregnancy. And it's from the time you get pregnant to about approximately a year after, because you can still die from what's happened in pregnancy up to a year afterwards. So we have the lowest rate of, once again, we have 17.5 per 100,000 women die in pregnancy. But if you break it out by race, Black women have a maternal mortality rate of 40 per 100,000. That is more than twice what it is for our general number, and 2.5 times that of white women. The death rate, the maternal mortality rate in pregnancy for Black women in the United States is so bad that there are 85 countries ahead of us Okay, I see that. 85 countries ahead of us with better infant mortality rate. And our maternal mortality rate, I'll just end with this, is getting worse by the year. I'm giving you that 40 is a couple of years ago. It's getting worse by the year. And there's only 2 other countries who have worsening mortality rates than Black Americans. If we were a country, than Black Americans. That's Afghanistan and Sudan. So we rate with really low, and it's abysmal. And part of the reason, when they've looked at studies about, there's a variety of reasons why, but part of the reason is the lack of access to good coverage and care for Black women. I'll just say one thing. I got 1 minute left to say one thing real quick. Black women in breast cancer. As you know, Black women die way out of proportion from white women from breast cancer. And there have been recent studies looking at why, and half of the cause is they're not getting good coverage, good third-party payer coverage to allow them to access good care. And I'm going to end it with this personal story. I have breast cancer in my family. A few years ago, I had a lump in my breast. I had a cousin who had a lump in her breast. I had to pay to get a diagnostic workup almost $1,000. So did she. Because I'm a physician, it was an ouch financially, but I was able to come up with that money within a month. She didn't come up with that money before she died of breast cancer, because she couldn't continue to get the kind of workup she needed. And I'll never forget that, because she was my age. So she died, I lived, but this is what happens to Black women. So I'll stop there. Oh, I didn't show my,
Wow. Well, hey, Claire, wow.
I didn't-
Very informative.
yeah, I didn't show my, I put it in the chat. I put the links in the chat earlier about at 1:16, I put the links in the chat. That's what I was going to show on the screen. So if you go on the chat and look at 1:16, you can see the links to the video and the link to the petition. We have a petition to Secretary Becerra of Health and Human Services saying, stop privatizing Medicare.
Well, listen, in terms of the video, how long is your video? Is it minutes or seconds or?
Unfortunately, it's long. It's the video of the webinar we gave to inform people. And it's 90
okay.
minutes.
Yeah,
90 minutes. It's 90 minutes. So you need to carve out 90 minutes to watch it. We recorded it. It was the webinar. We recorded it and put it on YouTube as a video.
Okay. You know, one of the things that, you know, you clearly laid out, especially towards the end of your presentation, and even though it wasn't purposefully, is a connection between the inadequate health care or health status of Black folks here within the United States. Again, if we conceptualize ourselves as a nation of people, and perhaps that's one of the things we need to talk more often about, we need to see ourselves as a nation of people. We are actually a nation within a nation. We are a colonized nation. But the connection between the nation of Black folks here within the so-called United States of America, comparable to the health status of other sovereign nations around the world, namely nations of color. And how when we look at that, we see the same forces at play. I reflect again on the comments that were made by Sister Erica, by Brother Namdi, and other people making that connection between imperialism and the domestic colonialism that we face here as folks of African descent. How it's all really the same playbook, right? Various chapters. Domestic policy and so-called foreign policy are always connected to one another, even though we know that at least with one of these ruling political parties, oftentimes they trick and they fool most of our people into thinking that there's no real concrete connection between domestic policy and international policy. So we have Black people who are at home who call themselves Black nationalists, who say they believe in Black liberation, but are looked the other way when it comes to how the US is always involved in bombing and droning and maiming other people in other nations around the world. So, you know, we can root for our freedom and liberation, but we won't support the Palestinians' right to self-determination. And so, again, those are some of the contradictions that I think discussions such as yours and discussions that were led by Erica and others will kind of open up our eyes and see really the concrete connection so we can connect all the dots together. Much in the same way that Dr. King and Malcolm did before their murders and assassinations. So what I'd like to do now is to go ahead and do my little presentation, and I'll try to be very mindful of the time. I know that some of us have to leave, and I really want to spend as much time as possible to responding to the questions and to the comments that people have made. So with that being said, let me see if I can go to the chat screen real quick. I mean, not the chat screen, the share screen. And I think I have my thing here. And okay. I hope everyone can see the screen. I'm gonna do a very quick PowerPoint. But first of all, following the format, I'll just talk a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And, you know, just as Claire mentioned, she talked about growing up in that era where Frank Rizzo was a very well-known police who had serious issues with the Black community. He had developed a reputation for his brutality and for his violence that was directed towards the Black community throughout the city of Philadelphia. And so I grew up in that particular era as well. Oftentimes I'll joke with people when we talk about the Black Panther Party, the Philadelphia chapter of the Black Panther Party. And what I'll say to people is that, you know, one of our most successful recruitment tools was actually Frank Rizzo, because a lot of times you could go to different communities and neighborhoods and you could talk about the Black Panther Party and you could talk about the programs and the projects of the Black Panther Party. But when you started talking about finding ways to combat police brutality, finding ways to resist the violence that were coming from the Philadelphia police force, namely in the name and in the image of Frank Rizzo, that would catch a lot of people's attention. And it certainly caught mine as a teenager on the streets of Philly. And so I became involved by hooking up with the Black Panther Party and by going to the political education classes and joining the Black Panther Party and getting involved in the Black liberation movement as a teenager. I was one of those young people who was hard-headed, did not necessarily listen to the wisdom of my elders. And so I didn't do very well in school. It was a very dysfunctional period of my life. And I wound up getting kicked out of high school. I had stayed in high school longer than what I needed to for my grade level. And so they basically told my parents that there was only two choices. But one of those choices was not for me to remain in my high school. And so I subsequently found myself kicked out of high school, and I got a full-time job working in the evenings, and during the morning and the early afternoon, I would just hang out with the guys in my neighborhood. And one of those particular mornings, we were just hanging out, and some brothers from the Black Panther Party came through our neighborhood, and they invited us to the political education class. And so we thought about it. You know, we had to make some decisions because the gang war situation in Philly was really, you know, on and popping. And I lived in a section of West Philadelphia. I'm originally from West Philly, from the bottom. And in my particular section of West Philadelphia, what I didn't know, and I found out years later, was that in my particular section, we accounted for over 10% of all the murders in the city of Philadelphia. And we were within a 10-block radius. And so that's the environment that I grew up in. And so we made a decision, you know, my crew, we made a decision we were going to go to this other part of the bottom where the Panther office was. I touched base with some people who I knew, my cousins and other people. And so we went. And so 3 of us went, 2 of us joined, and 1 of us stayed, and that was me. And so that was my introduction to the Black liberation movement. And I've been involved ever since then, like other members from the Black Panther Party or people from the Black liberation movement of that era. We had to encounter the ups and downs of movement building, the ups and downs of organizational development, the ups and downs of ideological development. And we had to deal with the impact of COINTELPRO, and we had to deal with the impact of our own immaturities and our own shortcomings as well. And so many of us paid the price. Some of us continue to languish in penitentiaries and prisons, not because of that, but because we resisted white supremacy and we resisted police murder and brutality, and we pushed back against capitalism and imperialism. And so many members of the Black Panther Party, along with other members of the Black Liberation Movement and other movements for freedom and self-determination, were targeted. They were arrested. They were criminalized. Some people were incarcerated for long periods of time. Some people were ostracized and they went underground. Some people fled the country and they're still in exile. And some people were murdered. And some people, through all of that, basically just kind of like gave up, not so much their principles, but they gave up in terms of being involved in the movement, and they went on to do some other things with their lives. So it hasn't all been pretty, but it is what it is. And so many of us are still here today, and the struggle continues. What I'd like to do is to get into this presentation. My part of this is dealing with resisting police and state violence. And I put together a PowerPoint, and this is not really anything that new
getting on
to many of the people within the New African Independence Party, but it may be new to some of the viewing and some of the listening audience. So I hope everyone can see it. And if there's an issue, if Brother Brian can let me know.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And so we're going to start this in just a moment. I know there's something that I'm missing here. Maybe it's just because I'm not formatting the screen correctly. Okay, well, anyway, this is resisting police and state violence. And first thing we like to focus on is, and this is something that people have been talking about recently, especially in light of the massive rebellions that erupted as a result or in response to the murders of George Floyd and others, Breonna Taylor and others. The call for defund the police. So we say defund the police in practice is actually a shift in allocating or budgeting resources from police departments to communities, especially Black, brown, and low-income communities, which are disproportionately policed and occupied by law enforcement. This defunding or reallocation is particularly applicable to heavily militarized, federally subsidized police forces in urban and suburban areas. I think Sister Erica, she made a point to talk about the militarization of police forces through a certain fund. I can't remember. I think it's 1063 or 1066.
1033 program.
Right, the 1033 program, which basically takes surplus military hardware and supplies and allocates it to local police departments around the country. So the funding of police for us would mean the reallocation of resources that would normally go to these heavily militarized police forces or federally subsidized police forces, because a lot of local police forces do get federal funds to subsidize, and not necessarily just around military style equipment, but it subsidizes a lot of local police departments in terms of up-to-date technology, up-to-date surveillance equipment, and things of that nature. These funds could, for example, be allocated to social service programs and community initiatives instead. Number two, excuse me, to call to dismantle the police. Dismantle the police, an initiative to completely dismantle police departments who have a demonstrable history of mismanagement, abuse, misconduct, and violence against the community. Such police departments are to be reconstructed and rebuilt with different management and officers. An example would be the police department of Jennings, Missouri in 2011, which had previously employed Darren Wilson, who was the cop who murdered Mike Brown Jr. in Ferguson, Missouri, 3 years later in 2014. The reason I want to highlight this is because this is a classic example of how a police department was found to be so corrupt and so dysfunctional that the local public officials, at the urging of the community, they actually took a vote and they dismantled this police department. But what happened is that it was dismantled, but the cops who were part of that department were also able to apply to be police officers in other municipalities and other jurisdictions, and they did. And Darren Wilson was one of those police officers. And he went on to apply and he became a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. And subsequently, we know what happened from there. We could also find the same type of pattern with the police officer who killed Tamir Rice in Cleveland, Ohio. He did not come from a police department that had been dismantled, but he had been an applicant to another police department and he was rejected because it was cited that psychologically and emotionally, he was not stable enough to become a police officer. Well, he went on and he applied to become a police officer in Cleveland, Ohio, and we know what happened from there. He wound up being a police officer that we all saw on video who slightly emerged from his car as he shot down this 12-year-old kid who was playing in a public park with a toy gun in a state where open carry itself is actually legal. The next slide, abolish the police. Abolish the police, a demand to completely abolish all police forces based on their historical and current role of protecting the rich and wealthy while containing and criminalizing runaway slaves, for example, during the 19th century, immigrants and workers, Black people and people of color, notably during the 20th and the 21st centuries in general. And so, as we all know, or many of us have heard about, the origins of the United States police departments, the United States police forces. Originally in the South, they were organized to track down and to contain runaway slaves. But in the Northern police forces were actually put together to deal with the newly arrived immigrant population, right? As a way to control and to contain them and to criminalize them, so as to stop their competition with those white folks who had been here within what was called the United States of America for several generations before. This whole thing about white supremacy itself has allowed certain European immigrant populations to slowly but surely be integrated into the white family, the white nationalist family here within the United States. But that was not always the case. There were many folks of European descent who were rejected, and they were really not looked upon as our so-called authentic white people. For example, many Eastern European immigrants, notably who were Jewish. Many people who came from Italy, especially those who came from the southern part of Italy. And even the Irish people themselves were not really looked upon as legitimate so-called white people. So many people, in order to become legitimate white people, they had to step on the backs of Black people or step on the backs of indigenous people in order to be deemed worthy enough to be now included within the family of white supremacy. So numbers do matter, immigration does matter. When we just take a quick glimpse at history, we can't help but notice that a lot of the immigration laws themselves are based on notions of white supremacy and white superiority. And it's always been a numbers game. It's always been a demographic thing. So again, the call to abolish the police, a demand to completely abolish all police forces based on their historical and current role of protecting the rich and wealthy while containing and criminalizing, for example, during the 19th century, the runaway slaves, the newly arrived immigrants, workers of various kinds, Black people and people of color in general, particularly during the 20th and now even into the 21st centuries. And now community control of the police, something that for my generation was really promoted quite heavily through the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party always called for community control of the police. So in theory and practice, police would be representative of the communities they serve and subject to community oversight regarding hiring, termination, budgeting, duties, and discipline. a local community police review board with the above powers could serve this purpose. Now we know this hardly ever happens. I'm not sure if it's happened yet, but the principle, the idea of being able to control the police is not just something that means that when the police act up, you have a right to, call them into the office and maybe discipline them. Real community control of the police would involve, for example, all the things that I've listed here. Oversight, say-so, decision regarding the hiring, the termination, the budgeting, the duties, as well as the discipline. So these are all different ways to approach how we could push back against police violence. But we're not done yet. So we have one more. And this is what we call independent armed formations. Number one would be certified community police officers. Now, this may surprise and shock some people, but for those of us who are a little older, who used to watch some old school gangster movies, it's not that much of a shock. Think about the scene in The Godfather, the first Godfather, where Michael Corleone is trying to safeguard or provide some safety for his dad. And he has his adopted brother, who's the lawyer or concierge for their family. He gathers a group of guys together and they show up, I think, at the hospital, right? And they preempt an assassination attempt that's being led by a corrupt cop. The cop shows up with his crew, who are all police officers. And then when the Corleone people show up with their crew, the cop tries to say to them, you got to stand down. What are you guys doing here? And what the adopted brother Tom does, it says, well, number one, I'm an attorney. We all work for the Corleone family. And these gentlemen here are all certified police officers, and they work. And so they had the same power as the corrupt cop who brought his crew. The reason I say that is because if we look a little deeper, what we'll find is that in different municipalities around the country, there is authentic community control of the police, because the police officers in those areas have been certified by the state, and they work for the community, and they're answerable directly to the community. You'll see that type of phenomena, that type of situation rather, or phenomena in certain Hasidic Jewish communities, where they will have their own police forces, and they'll wear their religious garb, and the people know who they are, but they are certified police officers according to state law, right? And it's only when things become, real extreme that they would have to, for example, call in the more traditional police forces, right? But when it comes to dealing with their community issues, they basically are it, right? So I think that's something we need to look at. And the reason I bring these type of things up is because when people say we need to defund the police, we need to abolish the police, okay, ideally, those are all great things, but how do we also provide safety and security for the community? Who do the people turn to, right? In the Black Panther Party, we had something that we call liberated zones, right? Where, we couldn't provide complete safety and security 24/7 because we did not have the capacity for that. But we had liberated zones where it was clear that in this particular block where we were, if we were doing the breakfast program or doing the clothing program, then, you couldn't be gang banging and fighting. And if we had liberation school, you better not be standing outside the building where we're doing liberation school trying to sell some dope, right? If you did those kind of things, then you should not be surprised at the consequences that would definitely come your way. The mildest consequence might be just having a conversation. The other consequence could be something extremely physical, right? So when we talk about dealing away with the police, we still have to deal with the reality of safety and security for the folks within our community. When the guys on the block are sitting on your grandmother's step, and she's trying to get in and out to go shopping or go visit somebody, and they act as if they don't want to move, or they're trying to sell drugs from in front of your grandmother's house, who does she call? Does she call the local police? Does she call the NAIP? Does she call the Black Alliance for Peace? Does she call Sister Claire? I mean, who does she call? Who does she call to try to get some relief and get some justice, right? And so those are real questions that I think we need to answer. In that light, independent armed formations, certified community police officers, gun and rifle clubs that can train and educate and prepare our people as to how to defend themselves individually and collectively. And last but not least, community militias that are serious, community militias that will actually provide safety and security over a certain landscape, right? And that represent the people from the community, made up of people from the community who have been trained, who have been organized to provide security and to provide defense. We used to call them community defense groups a long time ago. So it's just something to reflect on. So that's really my presentation in terms of, you know, some effective, some ways are ideal of resisting police and state violence. And now with that, what I can do, I can stop the share screen. And I think now is, this is our question and answer session. And so we're gonna need some help. Brother Brian, if you could help me out as we try to navigate some of the commentary and some of the questions.
Yeah, we had a couple come up in the chat and then a few in the Q&A as well.
Okay. So where do you want to start? You want to start with the chat or the Q&A?
Yeah, I'll start with the chat. That was the first question that came in.
Okay, you want to go ahead and lay it out?
Give me one moment. Let me see if I can pretty much read it word for word. Respectfully, how does voting not reinforce the state as an authority, if not the authority? The overemphasis on participation in U.S. democracy by both us and then our oppressor has trapped our people into investing in a program that does not have to exist. If America no longer exists, then there is no longer a need to vote. I can, however, understand the desire to want to influence the material condition in the immediate for those that are most marginalized, but that is different than saying that we must vote because participation in U.S. democracy has no path to revolution. The only way we can ensure our liberation, it is once we have disentangled voting as a tactic of distributing power from white supremacy, that we can hope to leverage it in our communities to establish and maintain equity. And I think this question was posed for Brother Namdi.
Yeah, thank you. I thought that was an excellent question. And I think, first of all, the question itself represents the kind of void that's happened in our political movement since the 1980s, when there was an attempt to form the National Black Independent Political Party, which attempted to further that discussion. But since their disbandment, we haven't really had an advancement, right, in that independent Black political thrust. I want to say this. When we demystify elections, we have to get right down to it. Elections represent a struggle for political power, right? Revolutionaries are in a struggle for political power and influence. I'm not making any proposal that we based any revolutionary transformation on winning elections. Participation in an election does not mean giving any respect to the authority. Our conditioning in political education tells us if the Democrat and Republican are only two on the ballot, then we have to hold our nose and vote for one or the other. But the truth is, you've always had the political right to choose none of the above, right? You could put your own candidate name in there so that even though you're participating in the electoral process, your participation can also represent opposition to the capitalist choices that they gave us. I also think it's more important for us as political organizers to understand the arena of elections in a different way than the masses. When we have political campaigns that we are taking on, whether it's around political prisoners, whether it's around education, housing, police containment, right? Police brutality. It's upon us to take that same very struggle into the electoral arena and to make a real campaign, right, to inform people about what the solutions are to these political problems. Now, people may vote for you and you may lose, people may vote for you and win, but that is not really the ultimate aim of transformation. We should be in these elections as real critiques of the kind of politicians that cover these things up. We should be trying to form real independent, Black working class solutions. So let's assume that you get into these elections and you lose. What happens to all the contacts that you made? What happens to all the areas of the city or the state that you went into to do your campaigning? Does all that go in the trash can? Our position is that getting on the ballot and running your election should mean that you're getting out there, making contacts, building relationships with other organizations, so that after the campaign, you then call those people back and you build real organic organization from the bottom up, right? That builds our own legitimacy as organizers as well. I think it's a tactical discussion that we're having. And I think you did point out that there are opportunities where you can vote to defeat something that would impact taxes, putting something into place. There are strategical reasons why I don't think we should be in love with the electoral process, because the truth is, when the electoral process will no longer be allowed to us, have we built a movement strong enough that can move forward, to achieve our political goals, if the state does not allow us to participate anymore? Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, Sister Shaki, I see you had your hand up as well.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to, I think this is an important question as well. And I think one of the things that we need to look at is that our movement has to build what we call contending sources of power, where we're challenging the system. And, when I put that slide up about the, all of the unincorporated Black areas around the country, 1,200, and the 96 counties where we have Black majorities, and towns that we've been gerrymandered out of power. If we fight for power in these areas, it's not just the national elections that matter, but what about the local? Then we have that gives us the power to fight around other questions like what Claire laid out around the health care, for all, and what Erica laid out around the international questions, international solidarity and consciousness around questions that impact both domestically and internationally, etc. So I just wanted to add, to that, to what the outline that Brother Namdi laid out.
Thank you, Sister Shaki. Dr. Claire, did you have something you wanted to add? I see you had your hand up.
One of the things I wanted to add is this is the part of making the case for why we need to separate ourselves from the Democrats and concentrate on building our own independent political party or parties, is that one of the things that happens when we elect people is they immediately, the forces of power begin to work on them. And we need a way to discipline people when they don't follow what we want them to do. And so we can't do that when they're in the Democratic Party. The only way we can discipline people is if we have our party. That way you can discipline people when they don't follow what they're supposed to do. You can also support them better when they do follow what they need to do. but at least you can have a means to discipline people when they get corrupted.
True, very true.
Okay, let me jump over to the Q&A, real quick.
I had my hand raised. Can I
Oh,
make
go
a
ahead.
quick comment? I'm sorry. No, that's okay. You know
missed
what?
that.
I
Go
probably
ahead.
got the cheapest internet connection of anybody on this panel. Because, but it does afford me an opportunity to take a break. But I'm in the middle of listening and trying to think and conceptualize stuff, and all of a sudden I lose connection. It's like one of them, I don't know, I should use, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Freedom means really free. Once we get liberated, we can all have free, high class, high quality internet connection, right? Stop all that money going to these crazy capitalist countries. But listen, briefly, I just want to thank, everything that I heard everything that Brother Nambi had to say, and I heard I heard everything that Ishaki, or most of what Ishaki had to say, and I do believe most of what Claire had to say. I think everything is on point. One of the main reasons that we continue to struggle around this issue of dealing with electoral politics as a tool towards Black liberation and freedom is because of the historic disappointments that we've experienced collectively as a people, have invested with both mainstream political parties. As we often say, is that the Republican Party betrayed the national Black community in the midst of Reconstruction. And the Democratic Party continues to betray the national Black community since the end of the traditional civil rights movement or era, right? And so the real fundamental question is, where do we go from here? Not just in terms of our political thinking, because there are many people who have radical revolutionary political thinking and ideas, but they still find themselves tied to the Democratic Party establishment. Either they don't understand how to break away from it, or they don't have the courage to really break away from it and to go off in a different direction organizationally. But they stay within the Democratic Party and they think they can change the Democratic Party from within. And what I've often said to people, and this is just based on decades of observation and experience, is that ultimately what changes is not the Democratic Party, but you. And so, if we look at it from that point, and that's not to demean our brothers and sisters who put up very righteous fights within the Democratic Party with the hope that they can change it from within. But ultimately, the Democratic Party establishment doesn't change. It just makes adjustments. It reminds me of an old science fiction movie. Some of you may remember this and some of you may not. It was called The Thing. And The Thing could change into anything. All it had to do was just get close enough to something to be able to imitate it and to mock it. And that's what the Democratic Party is. It's the modern day political thing, right? So you talk about Black Lives Matter, all power to the people, free the land. All it has to do is get close enough to those of us who are saying those kind of things or living those kind of things. And then it just takes on our characteristics and it mocks our language. It mocks our posture, right? It mocks our imagery. And then it continues with the politics of imperialism and capitalism and economic injustice, right? So we have to be mindful of that. This is the thing that we're dealing with. Don't get fooled. It can look like you. Right? So don't be fooled by it. We have to take a firm principle position. We need to support those brothers and sisters who are still within the Democratic Party, support them for the good work that they do, but always encourage them and try to lift them up out of that so they can become more independent.
I'd like to make one last comment quickly on this, if allowed.
Yeah, make it quick so we can move on to the next question.
Okay. I just wanted to encourage people to, go back and study the Reconstruction government, the Reconstruction movement, and to understand that we need to re-educate our people that the starting point is not some candidate popping up running for office, but the organization of the masses of the people who are implementing candidates, bringing forth candidates out of a social movement around certain questions. So we need the New African Independence Party and the Ujima People's Party and the Keysville Concerned Citizens, whatever formation the community can build, where the platform and the needs of the community are the basis of people running for office, and we're running them independent of the Democratic and Republican parties representing those movements. So we should study that. The union leagues, study it, and the national convention movements that happened before the Civil War and after the Civil War, representing the interests of Black people. So I just want to add that in for people's consideration. Thanks.
Thank you. There's a question, I think Dr. Cohen is actually answering it, but I'll go ahead and repeat it here. The question is, the rate of Black women getting C-section has risen 30% since the 70s. Why is it that C-sections are performed 37% more than any other race of women?
Okay, so I can answer this. Either I'm not an OBGYN, this is one of the troubling areas of medicine that I've been interested in. So first of all, in the United States, way more C-sections are done anywhere than anywhere else in the nation, in the world, okay? And there's a number of reasons, both why that and why they're disproportionately done in Black women. So the first reason is, this is an excellent example of how the for-profit motive distorts the practice of medicine. It's more profitable to do C-sections than it is to have live natural births. You don't even need doctors for live natural births, to be honest with you. 95% of live natural births can be delivered safely and effectively by a midwife or doula. And in fact, studies are showing that for Black women, you're safer having the delivery done, your prenatal care and your delivery done by a midwife or a doula, okay? And a lot of it has to do with some of these distortions. The second thing I can tell you from having gone to medical school, and I have followed this, so I have to say that unfortunately this is still true. We are taught some very racist things in medical school about the difference between Black women and brown women and white women and what their needs are for gynecological and medical care and how to treat them. And this continues to this day. I'm not going to get into the graphics, but unfortunately, that's a fact. So when doctors approach the care of Black versus white versus brown women, they treat them in different ways and they respond to different signs and symptoms in different ways because of what they've been taught. And unfortunately, just like in my field in psychiatry, you're still taught the same trash. They're still taught the same trash. And this is why doctors a lot of times miss things like preeclampsia or hypertension, because they're taught that they're literally taught that Black women have a higher blood pressure to begin with, and they're not as sensitive to blood pressure. I mean, they're taught a lot of, be honest with me, racist. I want to use a curse word, but I'm not going to. And how this continues to be taught year after year. So one of the things that I say to my patients and to my family, by the way, I say, it's important for you to talk to your Black family members who are medical professionals to get the right information, and then to question and challenge doctors when they tell you things. Don't just take what they say. Don't do that. I tell my family members that all the time. Don't just accept what they say. Ask why. How did you decide this? Where is this coming from? And then I tell them, since I'm a doctor, tell them that you have a family member who's a doctor. You know, we also happen to have a family member who's a nurse. And so they know, and you'll get better care. So one of the things is the way doctors are taught, the distortions of the profit motive, and the way they're taught is racist. It's institutional. You want to call it institutional race. They're taught a lot of racist crap. And then some doctors are racist and don't really care. And then finally, we as patients need to stand up and advocate more for ourselves about what we need and what we want to have happen in our care. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Cohen. So let's move on to the next question. And this might be kind of a little bit of what we talked about before, but someone had brought up the fact of what Ice Cube had done around the 2020 election with his Black agenda, and he didn't get a lot of support with trying to establish that. He was ousted by his own people. So anyone have an answer to that?
Can I just quickly respond for you, Nambi? I think the primary issue with what Ice Cube did is not that he didn't receive support, it's that Ice Cube created a Black agenda on his own without community involvement, and then took it to people, and then asked for support. It wasn't something that he had a collective gather around and create an agenda around. It wasn't anything that he talked to community organizers around. He didn't have any communal discussions. He didn't reach out to folk. He created his own agenda based on his own material needs on his class status.
Mhm.
And that was replicated in the agenda. And then he took it to people that he had direct connections with. He did not invite community into these meetings. He completely ousted community. So the idea that community turned their back on a Black agenda proposed by someone who does not have any connection with the Black working class, it did not go out of their way to make any connection with the Black working class, is a little silly. I think that when we talk about a Black agenda, we have to lift up the most marginalized of us. We have to consider those people. We have to prioritize the Black working class. And when we're not talking about healthcare, we're not talking about jobs, and we're not talking about housing, or we're talking about it in limited ways that promotes Black businesses, but not the Black worker, that's an issue. And it's an issue that should be contended with if we are going to have an overall Black agenda.
Can I make a comment quickly, Brother Nandi, just if it's okay with you, if it's okay with Brian? It's like make a, and this is not in response to what Sister Erica just laid out, because she's absolutely correct about what happened with Ice Cube. I'm responding to a series of comments that I see popping up on the screen. Let's be very clear. A lot of the things that many of us wish for is like a Black liberation wish list. Those things would never happen unless Black people have power. And in order for us as Black people to have power, we have to have a revolution. We need a revolutionary movement. We have to engage and indulge seriously in a revolutionary process that whose end result will be the seizure of power for us, and hopefully for other working class and poor people as well, right? But the only way we're going to be able to do a lot of the things that so many of us think need to happen within the Black community, these fundamental things that need to happen, those fundamental things can only happen for us as they have happened with other people all around the world who have been able to fight successful revolutionary struggles, come out victorious, and then have the power to seize control over how the new society is going to look. The institutions, the structures, the systems, and henceforth, the families, the communities, the neighborhoods. So unless we actually seize power, and unless we actually have a revolution whose goal is to seize power, the only thing we will ever do is to continue to have discussions where we criticize one another about the Black liberation wish list and who's not doing what on the wish list. It's just a wish list. We got to fight for power. We got to have a revolution. Malcolm X told us that several decades ago. It hasn't changed. Dr. King came to that realization several decades ago. It hasn't changed. In order for us to be able to do the things that will help us to become better human beings, we have to dismantle the systems of economic injustice, i.e. capitalism and imperialism, colonialism, and we have to dismantle white supremacy, period, in order for us to be able to do and be who it is that we seek to do and will seek to do and what we seek to become. We need to have a revolution, folks. We got to fight for power. Cultural clubs, buyback programs, conscious celebrities, that's not it. That ain't gonna do it, right? We gotta have a real, genuine revolution. Thank you very much for your indulgence, Brother Namdi. I know I can get on your nerves. All right, that's my guy though. Okay.
I think Sister Erica really think Sister Erica really answered the way in which I wanted to address it. But I do want to acknowledge something that Sister Ashaki pointed to. If we study our own history and you look at what happened during Reconstruction, right? It is the actual work of building power that defines what we do in elections. This is where, again, I keep saying the political education question is important. If our first answer to involvement in the electoral process is to engage the ruling class around what we think they should do for us, right, with an agenda that we take to them, then we're starting from the back, we're starting it backwards, right? We have to build our own political institutions, our own economic institutions, our own social institutions, right, who have a platform for building power. And to Sister Christina, who's asking this question, you are completely right. We have to build institutions of power which contend with the ruling class. The use of the electoral process is just a front for our struggle. If the election process was not available to us, it would not change the fact that we still have to organize ourselves. Ice Cube comes into this picture without doing no organizing work, without grounding himself in the masses, right, and building institutions. What he did was use his celebrityship, which he thought would give him a lot of rank to be able to make this happen. And it's the ass backwards way of trying to engage in politics. I can honestly tell you, we've been involved with our process for the last 11 years, and we've only run one time. And we have no real urge to be running candidates when you don't have organization, right, that can fight for the same things. Because after the election, what the hell do you do afterwards, right? Because Ice Cube don't have no political program after the elections. He's done, right? And I think that's what we have to really struggle for, is that electoral politics cannot be disconnected from our overall revolutionary struggles for self-determination and power over our own Black working class lives. So, but Sister Erica really laid out what his contradiction was. So thank you.
Thank you all so much for those answers. This is kind of, I think this question might be a little bit on the same lines of what we've been speaking about as well. The question is, what can be done to get rid of capitalism? Can we Black people do it without other historical revolutionary groups? I'll leave that to the panel.
I'll say this, if it's open. You know, one of the things that I've spoke of before, and I've written just a little bit about, is, and I'll just frame it generally, just to have people conceptualize it. National liberation and social revolution, right? National liberation for Black folks in this country and other people of color, right? And then a social revolution for the elements, especially amongst the white working class and the white petty bourgeoisie, right, who choose to engage and who want to see this transformation in what we now call the United States of America, right? But it has to be a dual process, right? And it has to be a process that's led by the forces of national liberation, i.e. Black folks, new African folks here within what we call the United States of America. We have to lead that charge along with our other brothers and sisters of color, especially the indigenous folks whose land we all live and breathe and stand upon, okay? But that's the only way we can really make this happen. We will not be able to have a overall successful revolutionary process unless we do everything we can to bring along other forces who are also being oppressed. Now, that doesn't mean we can't continue to demand and continue to fight, right, for self-determination. But in order for it to truly be successful, we have to have folks all around us. Let's say, for example, if indeed, you know, the vast majority of our people decide that our base of operations are the base of our nation, so to speak, right? Even though we may be living elsewhere, the base of our nation is going to be in the South, because the South is where the majority of Black people continue to live, right? And most of us as Black folks who live in this country we have historical, and we have family roots and origins in the South, right? So let's say we all agreed, or the majority agreed, that's going to be our base of operations, even though we may be living elsewhere. We still have to maintain social, economic, and military relations with all those forces all around us, right? And so we have to find a way to engage again, national liberation and social revolution, right? National liberation and social revolution. And that social revolution part, a lot of that stuff is going to have to fall on the shoulders of the white working class, right? For real, right? We can't wait on them, but a lot of that's going to have to fall on them. So that's my 2 cents about that. I've written about this before. I wish I had more time to address it, but it is something that really, really needs to be talked about as we talk about strategic planning and as we really talk about a revolutionary process.
Sister Erica, and then I think Sister Ashaki, go ahead.
Yeah, as far as BAP's work, I think what makes BAP unique is the incorporation of all of these different African-led organizations under a common umbrella of revolutionary internationalism, just understanding how we are deeply connected in these ways and enough to move forward from a bottom-up grassroots level point of unity, because I don't think that we can dismantle a Southcom or an Africom without having people on the ground in these areas as well, organizing around these issues. BAP has developed the Africa team, where we have people directly on the continent that we speak about African with, and we organize around the issue of African with, as well as BAP has organizations here in the US where we organize around the militarization of policing. And that way we're able to make these connections more fluidly, enough that we have some sort of power building apparatus happening within the Black radical spaces and movements, where we are pushing forward that these ideas are not lost or dead. They're still ever existing. They still need to be tackled with, but I don't think that having just one anti-imperialist organization is going to cut it. We have to have a united front of multiple anti-imperialist organizations. And I think that that's what makes BAP's work unique, as being like part of the forefront of establishing that.
Yeah, thanks, Sister Erica, for those comments and everybody else's comments. I wanted to add into the mix that we have to, revolution itself, social transformation is based on the material conditions under which a given people exists. So we have to have an understanding of our own material conditions here in the United States in order to build a revolutionary movement that is challenging capital and that is fighting to transform the system that we have here. And I think, so it's imperative on us to understand our history, that we represent an internal colony, oppressed nation inside the United States, and that there are other, colonized forces inside the United States. And the fight, what is the antithesis of that colonization is to fight for independence. So the question of self-determination and how do we build that, and fight, a revolutionary movement. That doesn't mean we can't have allies. It doesn't mean that we can't unite with forces of other internalized colonies and nations and people. We must do that, as well as internal to the United States, as well as internationally. But we have to have, a basic, revolutionary movement, a fight for self-determination among our own people. And some of us believe, at least, that question involves viewing our struggle as the struggle for national liberation against U.S. imperialism. That has to be, we have to educate our people about the nature, of our conditions here. So it's not just like that. We're taught that, we just need to make America better, a more perfect union. So, but that lacks the understanding of, our condition, that we can't make America better, a more perfect union, by voting in more people or different people or black faces or more women. this will not solve the contradiction of our oppression inside this society. So, it's an educational process, but it's really the organization, of a black working class with, strategic considerations in terms of, how we're approaching a lot of these questions. And unity, we have to have a unified national revolutionary movement that represents the vast majority of our people and that has deep ties to the masses of our people as a part of their fights, for around concrete conditions that we're faced with every day. And that's what some of us are, the way we're understanding what our situation is and how we have to go about organizing. But we got to reach these conclusions collectively, as a Black liberation movement, and try to implement some of these things. So that's still where we're faced with a challenge of trying to reach agreement among ourselves as to what we're fighting for, what our strategy is to get there, how do we unify, how do we organize, and then how do we lead the masses of our people to transform this society. So that would be, at least some of my thoughts on this important question. Another good question that was asked. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for submitting questions and to our panelists who answered all the questions as well. We're done with taking questions now. We'll move on.
Okay.
We're a little bit kind of behind schedule, but go ahead, Brother Khalid.
Okay, so before we move on, in your estimation, Brian, did we respond to all the questions and comments for the most part?
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, and so, I hope we didn't leave anyone hanging. Again, this is an excellent panel. The comments that people made, I think, filled in the gaps and holes that I had as far as this connection around national liberation, right, and social revolution. I think what Sister Erica offered as far as the role of BAP and the work that BAP does, right, expands our understanding, right? And I think what Sister, Ashaki added also would expand our understanding, but also puts more meat on the bones in terms of our domestic situation. One of the things that our particular group is really focused on as the New African Independence Party is revolutionary struggle, revolutionary movement here within the United States of America, amongst the 45 and 50 million Black folks here within the United States of America. And so that's one of the reasons, for example, that we reach out to people who represent the Black Alliance for Peace, because we want to enhance our understanding of the international connection to help us to connect the dots between our struggles here domestically and the struggles of our brothers and sisters all around the world. And not just the brothers and sisters who make up the African diaspora, but oppressed people, colonized people, period, right? And so that's one of the reasons we're very grateful to groups and organizations like the Black Alliance for Peace. And we're very grateful to the insight of Sister, Ashaki and Sister Claire Cohen in terms of understanding that the healthcare disparities and issues that we face here as Black folks or African folks here within the US, right, mirror the same type of disparities and situations that other colonized African people and colonized non-African people face all around the globe as a result of what? Imperialism, as a result of colonialism. So that's the reason this particular panel was so important, because it helps all of us to grow. It helps all of us to connect the dots. I hope that we were able to answer just about every question to every concern. I think now, Brian, we can get into what the announcements. Is that it? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I need a little help. I need to pull up a screen or something here so I can deal with these announcements. If you guys can be patient with me just for a moment. And let me see, what do I got? I got all types of stuff here. Okay. Okay. I'm gonna have to bring it up myself, I think. Give me one moment. Brian, do you have a copy of the actual
Yeah, let me see.
program outline?
Yeah,
Okay, can you pull it up on your screen? I appreciate it.
yeah,
Could you share it with us, please?
yeah, just give me a moment.
All right. I think mine is kind of buried somewhere. Let me see.
Brother Khalid, can I ask a question while he's pulling that up?
Yes.
Somebody in the chat had asked for a copy of some of the materials that people presented. You know, the few slides that I had, and I guess yours and others. Can I email to you the PowerPoint, and then you can share it out with everybody that was on this call that was interested in reviewing it or something?
Yeah, certainly we can do that. Yeah, we can
be
do that. Also, you know, once this is all over, we can make this available. It'll be on our YouTube page. So we have a
Okay.
YouTube page, and you'll be able to, you know, check this out on our YouTube page. Again, I'm not too sure if we were able to do the connection with our Facebook pages at all. I don't think that was successful. If it was, it's a blessing. But if not, we'll put it on our YouTube page, and we'll put it on our website as well. And I would encourage people from the panel, your different groups of organizations that you represent, if you could put your contact information into the chat so people could see it and maybe make copies for themselves. Brian, were you able to get that on your share screen yet? If not,
Almost there.
you're almost there. Okay. Let me see what I can come up with. Okay, I think I have something here. So maybe I'll just use what I can pull up real quick. Okay, I have something. So we'll go back. Okay. And all right. So we're just going to scroll down here. If you look under announcements, we have a few. And I asked people from the panel if you had some announcements that you wanted to add in to do so. And, you know, I guess people didn't have enough time to do that, but you can share those announcements with the audience now. Here we have the National Alumni Association of the Black Panther Party is having its annual meeting. And that is scheduled to take place. It's having an annual meeting and conference October the 14th to October the 17th. And there's the link for those who want to participate. It will be held in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Just for those who may not know, October is usually called Black Panther Party History Month because the Black Panther Party was started in October of 1966. And I'm talking about the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense that was started by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale. So there's a few different groups that uphold the legacy and history and the traditions of the Black Panther Party. Two of those groups are the National Alumni Association, and the other group is called It's About Time Black Panther Party, and it usually sponsors the reunions, the anniversary type of reunions every 5 years or so. The Alumni Association, we have an annual meeting. It's About Time, we have 5-year reunions on a pretty regular basis. So we had the 50th reunion of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, California, and I think some of you may have participated in that. But anyway, the National Alumni Association of the Black Panther Party is having an annual meeting and conference October the 14th to October the 17th. Here's the link. The 55th anniversary Black Panther Party reunion program is scheduled from October the 22nd to October the 24th. And here's a link for that as well. And then we have the Spirit of Mandela Tribunal, okay, International Tribunal, which is being held from October the 23rd to October the 25th. And here's a link for that. And then the Black is Back rally and march on the White House. Black people marching on the White House is actually October the 6th to October the 7th. The march and rally is not on the 7th, it's on the 6th. On the 7th is an actual conference that will be held in the Washington, D.C. area. And here's a link for that. The NAIP, New African Independence Party, we also belong to the Black is Back Coalition, and we're part of the National Steering Committee for the Black is Back Coalition as well.
Brother Khalid, just a quick correction. I know you meant to say November, but you said October.
Oh, you mean for the Black is Back?
Yeah, it's November the 6th.
Yes, thank you very much, brother. Yes, it's scheduled for November the 6th to November the 7th. Thank you very much for that correction, brother. November the
Also-
6th to November the 7th, and the 6th is the actual rally in March, and the 7th is a conference. And the conference will be online or in person, depending on the registration. Someone else had a comment. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just want to mention please excuse me, that with the tribunal, I believe it starts as well on the Friday, the 22nd of October. They have an evening program, cultural and presentations or something that night, and then the actual tribunal will start on the 23rd.
On the 23rd. Okay, so that
yeah,
should
so-
read October the 22nd.
Yeah.
Throughout October the 25th. Okay. Now we do have a couple of minutes. Well, we're a little over a minute, but what I'd like to do quickly, I'm gonna go ahead and click this stuff so people can visually see what's going on. And we'll start from, right. All right. Can you all see the screen? Can you all see this particular screen? It has annual membership meeting.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. So just to give you this a visual idea. So annual membership meeting and weekend registration form. And this is from the National Alumni Association of the Black Panther Party. And so, you know, it's not just the members of the Black Panther Party, it's the former members of the Black Panther Party, our children, our grandchildren, in some instances, our great-grandchildren, people from the community. This is going to be held, I do believe, at Temple University. As a matter of fact, I'll be doing a workshop during this particular gathering, and I'll be talking about, I think, point number 7 of the 10-point platform program of the Black Panther Party, which I think speaks to police brutality. So, you know, we want to encourage people, if you're in the Philly area, or if you're in that tri-state region area, Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York, stop on by. Okay, so we can move out of there. And now we'll look at the 55th anniversary reunion program, which I was able to make it to the 50th anniversary, myself and brother Doug. And so we participated in that. And so again, you know, for those who are interested, you can make a donation to help out with the cost. You can purchase program booklet, program magazine, and, you know, just go to the page and there's a lot of information about the history of the Black Panther Party, the struggle, the continued struggle for freedom, around freedom for political prisoners, a tribute to Panthers who passed away, those who passed away who were incarcerated as political prisoners, and those who passed away who were on the streets in recent years. A lot of workshops, a lot of information, you know, some highlights from the 50th, for example, the panel that dealt with political prisoners. There was a very engaging panel I remember from 5 years ago that featured representatives from the international section of the Black Panther Party. And it featured the women who were part of the international section, Kathleen Cleaver, Barbara Cox, you know, and some other folks. Okay. Trying to make sure we give everybody a play as we wrap this up. And then the Spirit of Mandela Tribunal, the International Tribunal. Here it is here. There's still time to have your group or organization listed as an endorser. There's still time to make a donation. There's still time to purchase an ad. So, you know, we want to encourage the people who are part of this particular conference and this gathering to please support the Spirit of Mandela. As you can read, a campaign to bring international attention to U.S. violations of the human rights of U.S. held political prisoners. In addition to requesting that the International Commission of Jurists return to visit our political prisoners. We are organizing an international tribunal on this issue in 2021, and this is it, right? So this is very, very important. You still have time to support and to attend if you're in the New York area, and if you can't make it physically, it also has an online component that you can participate in and support. And the Black is Back Coalition, again, Black People's March on the White House. And this is an annual march that we have every year, the Black is Back Coalition. And we encourage people to participate. And this too is a hybrid where physically we would like for you to show up in Washington, D.C. to participate in the march and the rally. But the conference on the second day is something that you can join in via online, I do believe Zoom, or if you have the resources and the time, you can come down to Washington, D.C. Make sure you fill out the registration correctly because seating is limited, for the in-person part of this event. So again, this is the Black People's March on the White House, sponsored by the Black is Back Coalition. From our panelists, if there are any announcements that you would like to share, we would like to hear that from you now.
Hey, Brother Khalid, we actually lost Dr. Cohen and our comrades from the Ujima
Okay,
party.
well, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah. So we just trying to stay tight on schedule. I know that Brother Namdi had some other things he had to tend to, and I'm glad he hung around as long as he did. Sister, Ashaki, any announcement that you would like to make as we end?
No, not not any that we're prepared to do now. Just want to, as you've already done, encourage everybody to participate in the tribunal coming up on the third weekend in October. So we're looking forward to that and continued work with around mass incarceration, and particularly the freeing of all political prisoners and prisoners of war, and educating the masses on these heroes and sheroes who sacrificed to advance, the struggle for Black liberation. So just really want to emphasize that. In November, we're going to be doing a national workshop on the Black working class, but we don't have the information available on that yet in terms of the date and content, but that's something that we're working on. And so people can look forward to hearing from us in regard to that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you all for taking some time out of your busy schedules and taking some time out of your personal time, your family time, because this is Saturday. I know that a lot of us, we have family, we have friends, we have associates, and we want to do some personal family type of things. We talk about the Black working class. Oftentimes we forget that the Black working class is just that. It's a working class. We have people who work in the home and out the home. We have parents and grandparents and others who work in the home. And we have those people sometimes who do double duty. They work in the home and out the home. Mm-hmm. So if we're going to be building upon the history and legacy of the Black working class, we need not ever forget that. So I want to thank you all again. I want to say, we appreciate in a very humble way your participation and your support. And the NAIP, New African Independence Party, will continue to do everything we can in pursuit and in support of Black freedom and self-determination. In freedom and self-determination for all oppressed people, not just here within the United States, but all those people abroad as well. All power to the people and free the land.
Free the land. And I thank you all. Thank everybody. And,